In the shadowed cradle of ancient Rome, where marble columns whispered secrets to the wind and the Tiber River flowed like veins of forgotten blood, a boy named Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus was born into a world of glittering ambition and lurking peril. The year was 12 AD, under the reign of Emperor Tiberius, a time when the empire stretched from the misty forests of Germania to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, its power as vast as it was fragile. Little Gaius, later known to history as Caligula, a nickname derived from the diminutive soldier's boots he wore as a child, grew up amidst the opulent halls of the Palatine Hill, where emperors plotted and gods were made mortal. But beneath the facade of imperial splendor lay a cradle rocked by tragedy, one that would twist the boy's soul into something unrecognizable, a harbinger of darkness that even the most jaded senators could scarcely fathom. From his earliest days, Gaius wandered the corridors of power, his small feet echoing against stone floors polished by the sweat of slaves. His father, the beloved General Germanicus, was a hero of Rome, whose triumphs in the Germanic wars had earned him the adoration of the legions and the envy of the court. Yet fate dealt a cruel hand. Germanicus died mysteriously in Antioch in 19 AD, poisoned, some whispered, by agents of Tiberius himself, who feared the general's popularity might eclipse his own throne. This well-known historical fact, the suspicious death of Germanicus, cast a long shadow over young Gaius, imprinting upon his tender mind the brutal arithmetic of power. Trust no one, for even family could wield the dagger. As the boy stood by his father's bier, the air thick with incense and muffled sobs, he felt a stirring within, a cold ember of rage that flickered in his chest, promising warmth only through vengeance. Oh, how his thoughts raced in those moments, a whirlwind of grief and confusion. Why must the mighty fall? Why does the empire devour its own? But there was an obscure detail, unsettling in its intimacy, that few chroniclers dared to record. During his exile on the island of Capri with Tiberius, young Gaius was subjected to the emperor's peculiar games, where the old man, riddled with paranoia and vice, would dress the boy in elaborate costumes, forcing him to perform as mythical figures in private spectacles that blurred the lines between affection and torment. These sessions, hidden from the prying eyes of Rome, planted seeds of depravity in Gaius's fertile imagination, teaching him that power was not just conquest, but the unchecked indulgence of whims, no matter how twisted. In the dim light of those island villas, surrounded by the crash of waves that seemed to mock his isolation, Gaius's mind wandered into forbidden territories. He envisioned himself not as a victim, but as a master, turning the tables on those who had toyed with him. The sympathy one feels for the orphaned child is profound, a deep ache for the innocence lost to the machinations of elders. Yet, critically, one cannot ignore how this crucible forged a monster, his emotions a tangled web of fear, desire, and unquenchable thirst. As years passed, Gaius returned to Rome, his facade of boyish charm intact, but the shadows within grew longer. He navigated the treacherous court with a smile that hid sharpened teeth, endearing himself to Tiberius while secretly harboring dreams of ascension. The people of Rome, weary of Tiberius's reclusive tyranny, looked to the young heir with hope, unaware of the storm brewing in his heart. Emperors before him had balanced benevolence with brutality, but Gaius's path promised something far more perverse. A reign where personal gratification would eclipse the welfare of an empire. In quiet moments, alone in his chambers, he would gaze at the busts of his ancestors, Julius Caesar and Augustus, and wonder if their divine blood coursed through him, granting license to transcend mortal bounds. Yet beneath this grandeur lurked a vulnerability, a boy's plea for love twisted into dominance. The city buzzed with anticipation as Tiberius's health waned, the forums alive with rumors of succession. Gaius, now a young man of striking features, pale skin, piercing eyes, and a frame that belied his inner turmoil, played the dutiful grandson, But his thoughts betrayed a darker ambition. He imagined the throne not as a seat of justice, but a pedestal for his desires, where the line between ruler and God would dissolve. Sympathy swells for the child scarred by loss, yet criticism mounts for the man who would let those scars fester into wounds inflicted on others. Did the tragedies of his youth truly doom him to perversion, or did he choose to embrace the shadows, becoming the architect of his own infamy? As the sun set over the eternal city, casting elongated silhouettes across the forum, the stage was set for a tale of ascent that would plunge Rome into nightmare, the innocent heir transforming into the most perverted king history would ever know. With the death of Tiberius in 37 AD, the empire exhaled a collective breath of relief, ushering in the reign of Caligula, the young emperor whose accession was met with jubilation from senators and plebeians alike, hopeful for a return to Augustan glory. But as the laurel wreath settled upon his brow in the grand ceremony at Misenum, where Tiberius's body lay cold and unwept, the shadows that had cradled him in youth began to uncoil, revealing a ruler whose desires would warp the very fabric of Rome. Remember the cold ember of rage from his father's poisoned demise, that flickering promise of vengeance? It now ignited into a blaze of indulgence, where the throne became a stage for forbidden passions, and the palace halls echoed not with decrees of state, but with the hushed gasps of scandalous liaisons that blurred the boundaries of decency and domination. Caligula's court transformed into a labyrinth of lust and fear, where courtiers navigated silken temptations with trembling steps, their loyalties tested in ways that history shudders to recall. He surrounded himself with a coterie of favorites, both men and women, drawn from the nobility and the streets, their beauty a currency in his perverse economy. Whispers spread through the forums of his nocturnal escapades, where he would don disguises, wigs of flowing hair, robes of shimmering silk, and venture into the Subura's brothels, not as emperor, but as a common reveler seeking thrills that power alone could not provide. In his mind, these forays were liberations, a rebellion against the stifling protocols of his upbringing. Yet critically, they exposed a deep-seated void, a sympathy-evoking hunger for connection that twisted into exploitation. The air in those dimly lit chambers grew thick with dread, as companions realized too late that refusal invited ruin, their fate sealed by a whim as fleeting as a lover's sigh. One well-known historical fact anchors this era of excess: Caligula's infamous marriage to his sister Drusilla, whom he elevated to divine status even in life, granting her honors reserved for goddesses and fueling rumors of incest that shocked the conservative Roman elite. This union, proclaimed in 38 AD amid lavish ceremonies, was no mere political alliance, but a declaration of his unbound will, where familial bonds dissolved into something darker, more intimate. Drusilla's thoughts, in those stolen moments, were a storm of devotion and terror, adoration for the brother who had shielded her in childhood, mingled with the chilling awareness that his love demanded everything, leaving no room for her own soul. Sympathy swells for her, trapped in his web, her emotions a poignant mix of loyalty and despair. Yet one cannot overlook the emperor's role in amplifying her suffering, his critical flaw in mistaking possession for affection. But an obscure, unsettling detail lurks in the annals, rarely voiced: Caligula's habit of hosting auctions in the palace, where he would sell the company of noble wives and daughters to the highest bidder among his guards and senators, turning the sanctity of Roman households into a marketplace of degradation. These events, cloaked in the guise of imperial games, unfolded in opulent banqueting halls lit by flickering torches, the participants' faces masks of forced mirth as bids rose like accusations. In his private reflections, Caligula justified this as a test of obedience, a way to root out disloyalty. Deep down, though, it fed a sadistic glee, an emotional rush from wielding power over the intimate. The victims' minds raced with humiliation and rage, Did I not serve Rome faithfully? Why must my honor be the price of his amusement, their silent pleas echoing unspoken through the night? As these cruel whims escalated, the empire's heart pulsed with unease, fear threading through every conversation like a poison vein. Caligula's liaisons extended to actors and gladiators, his favors bestowed and withdrawn with capricious cruelty, leaving broken spirits in their wake. He reveled in the chaos, his thoughts a whirlwind of justification. If I am to rule as a god among men, why should mortal taboos bind me? Yet this bravado masked a profound isolation, a sympathetic ache for genuine intimacy that his perversions only deepened. The senators, once hopeful, now plotted in shadows, their whispers a counterpoint to his desires. Rome, that eternal bastion, began to fracture under the weight of his excesses, its people caught in a web where lust bred tyranny. The tone of the city shifted from celebration to caution, as tales of the emperor's nights filtered into daylight, eroding the facade of benevolence he had briefly maintained. In his chambers, surrounded by mirrors that reflected his every angle, Caligula pondered his reflection, emotions swirling, pride in his audacity, a critical self-doubt that whispered of inherited madness. Did his forbidden desires truly liberate him, or were they chains forged from the tragedies of his past, binding him tighter than any foe? As the moon rose over the Tiber, casting silvery paths on waters that had seen empires rise and fall, the labyrinth grew denser, secrets unburied and hearts ensnared, drawing Rome ever deeper into the abyss of his reign. As the empire teetered under the weight of Caligula's unchecked desires, the year 39 AD marked a pivotal descent when he convened the Senate in a session that would forever etch his name in the annals of infamy, declaring himself not merely emperor, but a living god incarnate, demanding temples be erected in his honor across provinces from Gaul to Judea. This well-known historical proclamation, echoing through the Curia Julia where once Cicero had thundered against tyrants, shattered the fragile veil of Roman piety, transforming the forum into a theater of enforced adoration where priests bowed before his statues, their incense rising like pleas for mercy. Remember the labyrinth of lust from his palace nights, those whispers of forbidden liaisons? They now intertwined with divine pretensions as Caligula wove blasphemy into excess, his reign a tapestry where mortal folly bled into what many feared was eternal damnation, the sanctity of Rome crumbling like ancient mortar under the assault of his madness. In the opulent temples repurposed for his worship, Caligula installed golden effigies of himself, adorned with jewels that caught the light like mocking eyes, and he would appear before the masses dressed as Jupiter or Apollo, his robes flowing in silken waves, a scepter in hand that symbolized not justice, but caprice. His thoughts in these moments were a delirium of grandeur. Am I not the sun that illuminates the world? Why should gods envy me when I surpass them? Emotions surging with ecstatic conviction, yet laced with a critical undercurrent of paranoia, as if the heavens themselves conspired against his ascension. Sympathy stirs for the man whose fractured psyche sought divinity to heal the wounds of abandonment. But one cannot ignore the horror inflicted on believers, their faith twisted into subservience. The air in those sacred spaces grew thick with dread. As citizens queued to offer sacrifices, their murmurs a blend of awe and terror, wondering if refusal meant not just earthly punishment, but divine wrath from a god who walked among them. An obscure, unsettling detail emerges from the shadows of his excesses, Caligula's private rituals in the dead of night, where he would converse with the moon as his sister goddess, Selene, claiming Drusilla's spirit inhabited its glow after her death in 38 AD, and he demanded astronomers chart celestial paths to affirm his cosmic lineage, their calculations manipulated to prophesy his eternal rule. These sessions, held in secluded gardens atop the Palatine, unfolded under starlit skies that seemed to weep, with Caligula pacing marble paths, his mind a vortex of delusion and longing. If Drusilla watches from above, must I not join her in godhood? His emotions a poignant storm of grief turned megalomania. Critically, this blurred the emperor's humanity, turning personal loss into public blasphemy, evoking sympathy for his isolation, while condemning the tyranny that forced scholars to falsify heavens for his ego. The excess spilled beyond temples into the streets, where games and the Circus Maximus became spectacles of divine theater. Caligula racing chariots himself, clad in godlike armor, demanding victories that rigged outcomes and drained the treasury. Senators, once pillars of the Republic, were compelled to attend, their faces etched with forced reverence as the crowd's cheers masked underlying fear. In their private thoughts, they grappled with revulsion. How has the heir of Augustus fallen so low, proclaiming godhood while the empire starves? Emotions raw with betrayal and helplessness. The emperor's court buzzed with enforced flattery, poets composing hymns to his immortality, their verses dripping with irony that only the boldest dared whisper. Yet in quieter reflections, Caligula's own doubts surfaced, a sympathetic flicker amid the madness. What if the gods reject me, as men have? This vulnerability fueled further outrages like bridging the Bay of Baiae with ships to fulfill a prophecy, a floating palace of debauchery where feasts blurred into orgies, the waves lapping like judgments deferred. Rome's crumbling sanctity manifested in revolts simmering at the edges, Jews in Alexandria protesting his statues in synagogues, legions in Germania muttering of omens foretelling downfall. Caligula responded with edicts of terror, his divine madness unleashing purges that echoed the betrayals of his youth, paranoia weaving through every decree. The people, caught in this tapestry, felt the threads tighten, their daily lives shadowed by the emperor's whims. Sympathy for the afflicted swells, a deep ache for those whose piety was profaned, while criticism mounts against the king who blurred folly with damnation, inviting chaos upon an empire once eternal. Did his proclamation of godhood truly elevate him beyond mortal judgment, or was it the ultimate perversion, damning not just his soul, but the sanctity of history itself? As thunder rumbled over the Capitoline Hill, portending storms both literal and metaphorical, the divine madness raged on, pulling Rome deeper into the abyss, where excess promised only ruin. In the shadowed underbelly of Rome's grandeur, where the year 40 AD saw Caligula return from a disastrous campaign in Germantia, abandoning conquest for mock triumphs that paraded seashells as spoils of war, the emperor's paranoia blossomed like a venomous flower, its petals unfurling to ensnare allies and innocents in a web of treachery and torment. This well-known historical folly, the conquest of the ocean, mocked in chronicles as a sign of his unraveling mind, paraded through the streets with wagons laden not with gold or captives, but with glistening shells collected from Gaul's shores, a spectacle that turned jubilation into uneasy laughter among the crowds. Remember the divine madness from his temple proclamations? Those echoes of godhood that blurred folly with damnation? They now resonated in every suspicious glance as Caligula's fears amplified, transforming perceived slights into plots and the palace into a fortress where trust was a relic of a bygone era, betrayal festering like rot in the empire's core. The emperor's court, once a labyrinth of lust, morphed into a chamber of echoes, where whispers of conspiracy slithered through marble halls, and guards stood vigilant, their spears glinting like accusations. Caligula, haunted by nightmares of daggers, perhaps remnants of the glint from his father's poisoned cup in youth, summoned senators at midnight hours, forcing them to recount their dreams under torchlight, interpreting any omen of unrest as treason. In his mind, these interrogations were safeguards, thoughts racing with frantic urgency. If I am a god, why do mortals scheme against me? Emotions churned, a sympathetic brew of terror from his isolated past, critically curdled into tyrannical rage that devoured the loyal without remorse. The air grew thick with dread as families awaited dawn with bated breath, knowing a single misinterpreted word could summon the Praetorian Guard, their knocks heralding doom rather than dawn. An obscure, unsettling detail clings to this era of torment. Caligula's use of dream interpreters, who were in fact tortured slaves, compelled to fabricate visions of betrayal from fabricated pains, their cries scripted to name innocents in elaborate plots that justified purges. These sessions unfolded in hidden chambers beneath the Palatine, lit by flickering lamps that cast grotesque shadows, the slaves' minds fracturing under duress. What lies must I spin to end this agony? Their emotions, a pitiable torrent of despair and resignation. Sympathy deepens for these unseen victims, pawns in the emperor's paranoia, while criticism sharpens against the king who amplified his fears through their suffering, sowing seeds of real discontent where none had sprouted. Treachery echoed through the provinces, where governors trembled under edicts demanding oaths of eternal loyalty, sworn upon altars to his divinity, any hesitation branded as sedition. In Judea, the order to place his statue in the temple of Jerusalem ignited revolts, the faithful's thoughts ablaze with righteous fury. Shall we bow to a madman's idol or defy and face annihilation? Their defiance a mirror to Caligula's own tormented soul. Back in Rome, he exiled or executed former confidants, like Macro, the Praetorian prefect who had aided his ascent. Now accused of imaginary coups, his fall a stark reminder that proximity to power invited peril. The emperor's banquets became trials, where guests dined on delicacies laced with suspicion, forced to laugh at jests that veiled threats, their inner monologues a whirlwind of calculation, flatter too much and seem false, too little and court death. Paranoia devoured the innocent as informers proliferated like vermin, rewarded for tales that condemned neighbors, turning the city into a tapestry of fractured alliances. Caligula's sisters, once objects of his perverse affections, fell under scrutiny. Agrippina and Livilla banished for alleged intrigues, their exile a poignant echo of his own childhood isolation on Capri. In solitary moments, gazing from his balcony over the forum's flickering lights, the emperor's emotions surfaced raw, a critical, self-inflicted wound of doubt, mingled with sympathetic remnants of the boy who had lost everything to betrayal. Yet this only fueled further torment, as he decreed spectacles in the amphitheater where condemned souls fought beasts, their screams a symphony to drown his inner demons. The empire groaned under this weight, legions murmuring of mutiny, the Senate a ghost of its former self, members attending sessions in fear of absence being deemed disloyalty. Betrayals, real and imagined, festered, each purge breeding more resentment, a cycle that tightened like a noose. Sympathy for the tormented ruler wanes here, overshadowed by the horror inflicted on a populace ensnared in his dread. Did his reign truly sow the very doom it dreaded, or was paranoia the crueler architect, building walls that invited the blades they sought to repel? As winter winds howled through Rome's alleys, carrying portents of upheaval, the echoes of treachery grew louder, torment weaving toward an inevitable crescendo.
In the labyrinthine corridors beneath the Palatine Hill, where the echoes of treachery from seasons past reverberated like distant thunder, the year 41 AD dawned with a chill that seeped into the bones of Rome, culminating in the infamous assassination of Caligula by members of the Praetorian Guard, a conspiracy led by Cassius Chaerea that struck during the Ludi Palatini Games, ending his reign in a frenzy of retribution that the city had long whispered into being. This well-known historical event, the stabbing of the emperor in a narrow passageway as he departed the theater, marked the violent punctuation to 4 years of terror, the blades flashing in the dim light like judgments long deferred. Remember the paranoia that devoured allies in his purges, those festering betrayals that sowed the doom he dreaded. They now converged in a storm of blades and blood. the perverted sovereign cornered at last, his divine pretensions shattered against the cold reality of mortal frailty, leaving a legacy of horror that would whisper warnings through the annals of time, cautioning future rulers against the perils of unchecked desire. The plot had simmered in shadows. Cherea, a tribune mocked by Caligula for his effeminate voice, nursing grievances that mirrored the empire's collective wounds, his thoughts a cauldron of righteous fury. How long must we endure this monster who profanes gods and men alike? Emotions ran high among the conspirators, a blend of sympathetic desperation for Rome's salvation and critical resolve to excise the cancer at its heart. As Caligula strolled through the crypto porticus, oblivious in his hubris, surrounded by the clamor of festival crowds above, the assassins closed in, their daggers concealed beneath togas that billowed like shrouds. The air grew thick with dread, the emperor's final moments a whirlwind of confusion, his mind flashing to childhood betrayals, to Drusilla's ghostly gaze, emotions surging in a poignant rush of regret and defiance. Have I not been a god? Why do they turn on me now? An obscure, unsettling detail haunts the recounting. During the assault, Caligula's German bodyguards, loyal to the end, arrived too late, their howls of anguish mingling with the chaos as they discovered his body. But in a macabre twist, they slaughtered innocent bystanders in blind rage, turning the scene into a tableau of indiscriminate vengeance that prolonged the nightmare. Cherea's blade struck first, then others joined in a frenzy, the sovereign's cries echoing faintly, his thoughts fragmenting into terror. Is this the fall I foresaw in dreams? A sympathetic echo of the boy once cradled in shadows, now undone by the very power he perverted. The conspirators, their hands stained, fled into the pandemonium, emotions raw with triumph laced with fear of reprisal, critically aware that slaying a tyrant did not guarantee dawn's light. News rippled through Rome like a seismic wave, the Senate convening in haste, debating whether to restore the Republic or crown another Caesar, while the people oscillated between relief and mourning for the brief benevolence of his early rule. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, emerged from hiding to claim the throne, propped by the same praetorians who had felled his nephew, an ironic twist that underscored the cycle of imperial volatility. In the aftermath, Caligula's statues were toppled, his name cursed in forums where once hymns to his godhood rang, yet whispers persisted of his excesses, the incestuous bonds, the divine madness, the tormenting purges, etching him as history's archetype of perversion. Sympathy lingers for the scarred heir twisted by tragedy, but criticism thunders for the king who amplified his pains into an empire's agony, his fall a crimson catharsis that stained the stones. The legacy endured, a spectral warning in the winds that swept the Tiber, reminding generations that power, when wedded to depravity, invites its own undoing. Senators who survived reflected in quiet chambers, their minds haunted. Did we act too late, or was his madness inevitable? The city, scarred but resilient, began to heal, the shadows of his reign receding like mist at dawn, though the horror whispered on, a eternal vigil against the tyrants yet to come. As the crimson hues of Caligula's fall fade into the softer grays of memory, dear listener, let us step back from the abyss, allowing the weight of history to settle like autumn leaves upon a tranquil forest floor. The emperor's tale, woven from threads of tragedy and terror, serves not merely as a chronicle of darkness, but as a gentle reminder of humanity's fragile dance between light and shadow. In his youth, scarred by loss, we glimpse our own vulnerabilities, the ache of abandonment, the lure of power's embrace, and perhaps find compassion for the boy before the beast emerged. Yet, in his excesses, we confront the perils of unchecked desire, urging us to nurture empathy in our own lives, to question the thrones we build within our hearts. Rome endured, as empires do, rising from the ashes of tyrants to forge new paths under wiser skies.
Claudius's reign brought reforms, a quiet restoration where arts flourished and justice tentatively returned, dimming the intensity of Caligula's storm. We too can find solace in this resilience, knowing that even the most perverted legacies yield lessons, blooming into wisdom that guides future steps. Let the horrors dissolve now like echoes in a vast cathedral, replaced by the soothing rhythm of time's inexorable flow. Breathe deeply, feel the shadows soften, wrapping you in a cocoon of reflection rather than fear. History's whispers need not haunt your dreams. Instead, let them inspire vigilance with kindness, turning past cruelties into beacons for a more compassionate tomorrow. As the night deepens, close your eyes to the tyrant's fall and embrace the peace that follows every tempest. Good night, wanderer through shadows. May your slumber be gentle, untroubled by the ghosts of yore.